Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining our webinar today, where we are going to take a little bit more of a data-heavy approach to the offerings that digital science has. We'll be looking particularly at Altmetric and Dimensions today. We're rather excited about it and hope you are too. It is August the 2nd. I wanted to run through some housekeeping first. So we are recording the webinar today, so you don't need to furiously scribble notes, although if you like that, you should. We will send around the recording afterwards, as well as the slides as well. I will be covering an overview of digital science as an organization. It does differ quite a lot from the standard organizations out there in the, I suppose, academic publishing research field. I'll give a very quick overview of the Dimensions and the Altmetric platforms that I'll be using to varying degrees throughout the webinar today. And then I will be basically doing a use case of looking at a particular company and looking at their outputs, looking at some of their publications, their footprint in the research world, and some of the insights that can be gained from it. I will preface this by saying that I am not what could be described as a data nerd. I can't do statistics like some people can. So what you can see here, what we will be showing, is things that are almost out of the box available in the system, things that are supremely easy to achieve even at a very basic level. And so some of the experts on the call will start seeing use cases that I'm not touching on, or approaches that might be even better than what we're doing here. So this is just to give you an idea of some of the data that's in our systems and what you can do with it. My name is Ben McLeish. I should have said that at the beginning, I guess. I'm doing a Director of Engagement and Advocacy work at Digital Science for particularly the Altmetric and Dimensions platforms across the academic sphere as well as the corporate one. And I'll be guiding you through that. And then once we've done with our use case, I will also take a brief bit of Q&A. And if you do have any connection issues, I am hosting this webinar by myself, so I'll be watching out for any mentions that happen, any issues that there are. You can use the chat box for feedback. You can use the Q&A box, or the question and answer box, to submit your questions if you have any. If you have any at the end that you feel you didn't want to type in or only remembered afterwards, that esprit d'escalier that catches us out every now and again, I will provide my contact details afterwards as well. So let's have a look then. To summarize digital science is to describe, I suppose, a portfolio company that has gathered together over since 2009. So we're coming up to almost a decade now. A group of companies, smaller startups as they were back then, I suppose approaching medium-sized companies now, which deal in different parts of the research lifecycle. Everything from the actual production of research. There is a company called Transcriptic that does robotic cloud-based laboratories, all the way through to managing that data, lab notebooks, safety manuals that are electronic, even things like Internet of Things. We have a company called TetraScience, all the way through to the dissemination, the discovery, the reading and consumption of that material, patent literature, grants data, all the way through to things like attention, both in citation form from other academic and research literature, or things like Altmetric, which of course is one of the focuses of today, the idea that one can look at the attention online that some set of publications have received. So we all are individual teams, individual goals, individual types of product, but work under this hood of making research better. And that means that with simply 300 colleagues, just over 300 colleagues in the entire organization, we are extremely light on the ground, but there is a nimble sort of startup feel to everything. Everything gets developed very quickly, very interoperably. We are incentivized just by being together in this sort of family to foster this sort of innovation between different areas, different companies. And today what we're looking at is predominantly, I'll do Dimensions first, but then we'll move into the Altmetric platform later on. So these are two different platforms. I'll explain them a little bit closer in a minute. But as you can see from this graphic, which combines actually both of the services in terms of the the data that can be found on them, we take an extremely broad view. I think probably a very unusually broad view of research data out there. Traditionally, research data meant, publications and citations, maybe an impact factor here or there. But we are looking much more closely at really the entire breadth that one can possibly track of research outputs, that be from the grant all the way through to the data that's produced from it, to the resulting publication within which that data can be found, the attention online, whether it's in Wikipedia or policy documents or news or blogs or the social web, then through to citations, which typically take longer than immediate online sort of buzz and attention. And then also looking at different kinds of almost follow-on research, things like clinical trials, patents, ultimately the influence of research within policy documents as well. This is essentially where we are beginning the search today. This is what we'll be drawing on. And to do that, I'm going to first use the Dimensions platform. So it's worth explaining what Dimensions is. We launched this in January of this year, but have been quietly working on it for about 2 years. And if you factor in the amount of work that was needed by each of the companies that contributed to it, there were 6 in total. Really, I suppose it's been in development for 10 years because some of those companies have been laboring at their particular area of research for that long. They've been working on aggregating the world's grants data, for example, or they've been working on with publishers to garner full texts and make them available to users. And so we end up with, at the moment, 4 broad buckets of data that are in this system, in this platform. 96 million publications, what I suppose we would call research articles, although they aren't all articles in the service. These are sort of the first tranche of items that are in the Dimensions platform. We will probably approach 100 million, I'm guessing, sort of very early next year, perhaps. We launched with 89 million, so it's jumping up by, I don't know, 5 million every 6 months, something like that. And in those records, we have, of course, the references and the citations. So the references made within that article to other literature out there, the citations which it has garnered since being published. Those are, of course, the standard. But we have also included the grants data. So you can see within an item what funded it and who funded it in 2 separate areas. And we've done the same with patents. So if a research article has then been cited by a patent, that appears as a citation in a separate little window underneath the main references. And the same thing with clinical trials as well. As you've probably guessed, it is grants, patents, and clinical trials that constitute the remaining 3 large tabs in the system, the sort of data pools. We call them cores. And so we have 4.1 million grants. These are public grants. They have been awarded. We don't contain, the system doesn't contain yet to be awarded grants. They have to have somebody it has been awarded to. I suppose rewarded works as well. The affiliations, of course, where that institution is, how much it was for, how long the project is running for or ran, because it could be in the middle of its running phase. It could have an end date in 2021. And so we have about, I think, $1.3 trillion worth of publicly awarded funding. Those are publicly awarded funding. We can't track private funding almost by definition. We have at the moment 36 million patents from our 100 million patent database that forms part of the IFI Claims Service, which is another sister organization of Digital Science, another one of those 14 companies. And again, within those, we can see the references to other patents. We can see references to publications. We can see the grants that may have led to that patent. In other words, that patent has referred to a grant, perhaps by number or by naming the organization, the funder itself. And of course, patents citing other patents as well. So where a patent has cited this patent, it's in there as well. And 423,000 clinical trials. These are human trials as well that again are linked to publications and grants. These constitute about 4 billion links between research data out there. About 1 billion of those are citations from academic literature. So you can see there's an enormous amount that has been hitherto missing in this area of what we tend to call ANI or research intelligence systems, whatever you want to call it, citation databases. And most importantly, and for the purposes of today, we have categorized all of these items, whether they are an article or a patent or whatever, according to multiple different fields of research. And we've done that not by hand, because that would be a laborious job. It would be the kind of job that you would punish someone with, I suppose. We have used artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and machine learning in order to take a set of items that has already been categorized by humans and is then trained on an AI to apply that logic that it is gleaning from reading the actual data, the full texts, the abstracts, the descriptions, and so forth, in order to categorize each type of data in our service according to a uniform set of categories. We can do that with more than one category. We have done it with, I think, 6 so far. All with varying degrees of granularity, depending on the structure of the pre-existing categories. And we can do it for custom categories if there is a data set large enough and a customer willing enough to, and interested enough to have that done. So that's the first point. The second point is that we can use that kind of system of looking at a particular field of research now in a new way, because we are now able to see outside of the category systems we had imposed on us before and outside of the data types to which those categories have been added. We do this on an item level. We do it item by item. We don't use things like journal category systems anymore because they were already quite problematic back in the day. If you have a general or a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary journal, you are left with terms like multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary or general, and not with the content of what is actually there. And so that, of course, can vary from article to article or item to item. And in fact, we find that in many cases, some items have more than one category attached. They could have 5 or 6, depending on what has been judged to be accurate, what is judged to be something that has a certain level of confidence with it. Now, to move to the Altmetric database, some of you will probably already know this service. You may actually already be customers of ours. This is basically an ever-growing database of all of the world's attention in terms of online media to research. You will find Altmetric data in the Dimensions database showing up in little badges, just as you will find Dimensions citations, the citations that we have teased out and found and discovered ourselves to build our own citation graph within Altmetric badges. They went live yesterday. So the two systems complement one another. But if I wanted to find out purely what is going on in online attention to a batch of items, or more likely for our customers, what are people saying about our stuff, then that is where the Altmetric service comes in. And they differ in another way as well. The Altmetric platform, the service here, is not really a database in the way that is understood by others. Items will only show up in the Explorer, the Altmetric platform, if they have actually been mentioned somewhere that we track once in the thousands of news sites, in blogs, in Twitter, and so forth. We do not begin with absolutely every item and then show you the attention on top. Items actually only ever get a record if they've been mentioned somewhere. And so that in that way, they are very different from the traditional database, which seeks to be comprehensive in terms of data. We do it the other way around and say we are comprehensive in terms of attention to whatever data has been discussed. We'll be using those today. As you can see, the numbers are quite mind-boggling for what is in Altmetric. We're seeing attention to research grow over time. That is various different factors involved. Some of it is just that people are using the social web much more for research over time. Some of it is that we have got better and better at actually finding the data. Mostly, I think it's the former, that the attention in general has grown. We can break this down even by things like demographic attention. So we won't do that today, but you are able to really focus in on what are people saying in a particular country at a particular time. I could even go down to individual users on Twitter, for example, or particular policy documents from America, for example. We can break that automatically down for you. So it is meant to be a way of really understanding the audience out there. So on to our test case then. We decided that we would like to show some of the applied ways in which you can make Dimensions work as an intelligence tool. And in a very harmless way, we're not going to be giving away any business secrets here of any company. We decided to choose Huawei as an example of a company with which you can play with the data in Dimensions. So the first step is going to be to find out what are they publishing and where do they publish and what can we understand from what their focus is in terms of their output. So I have actually included a link there so I can jump straight into this service. This is what you're looking at here is Dimensions. So this is our the large database that contains the grants, the patents, the trials, and the publications. And you can see I have actually searched in sort of in advance, if you like, for every version of Huawei that we track. So we have amassed about 80,000 research-based institutions worldwide. That could be, as you can see, corporates, it could be governments, it could be funders of research, so the German Research Foundation, things like that. And of course, in research institutes and academic institutions like universities. So there's something like 80,000. If you're interested in seeing the full database, you actually can do that by going to grid.ac, which was built long before Dimensions was brought to the world, and this is basically a free CC0 database where you can see, for example, if I type in Huawei here, we built this by hand. It was quite painful, and we have created a homepage for every area, every headquarter or localization of a company. So you can see we track, I think, seven altogether, seven companies, including the headquarter. And this does really, this is meant to help us with our disambiguation. So we don't just know the name Huawei Technologies and recognize that that's an affiliation. We also recognize that there is a city involved, there are administrative regions, there are ISNIs and cross-refs and homepages and so forth. We can see the type of company it is. We built this in advance. It is entirely free for you to search through and have a look. Why not look your own self up there and tell us whether we have an error or not, or whether you're opening, for example, a new area, and then we can add that new headquarters, for example. So what I've done, I've gone to the wrong screen, is that I have searched simply all the versions of Huawei that we have. You'll notice we even have the local language version of it, and I now have a profile. A fairly interesting profile of some of the data that has been produced. I can see they have 1,650 publications on which they are directly cited as an affiliation for one of the authors. There are actually 4 public grants that have associations with Huawei as well. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at today, almost 102,000 patents. So that's the data that I began with. What we have done is to have a look at how this breaks down. So in looking at the individual areas where Huawei is publishing, they do publish internationally. Of course, the dominant two are, interestingly, Canada and the US. There is a Chinese one there that is, I think, 4th on the list. But you can see here, quite simply, the amount of attention that they are getting in multiple different ways. So the yellow is actually the altmetric attention. So we can sort of see that even when they might be publishing less, they are actually publishing items that get traction online. They get attention. There is something about it that is capturing the imagination. It could be a market development for mobile technologies, most likely. It could be to do with those bendable screens. It could be to do with facial recognition, which I'll come back to later on. And so we can sort of understand the different types of attention that are received. There are 2 other metrics on here. One is the relative citation ratio, the other is the field citation ratio, the RCR and FCR. And these are metrics that we have been able to develop based on the fact that we have categorized things on an individual level. So we actually now have a way of telling you this item is being cited more or less than items in the same field. And that is judged by what the content of the item actually is. And we can do also the same thing, mostly with medical, but as you can see, there are items here that qualify for it. The relative citation ratio is looking at items in the co-citation network. That means, for example, in any given reference list where an item is showing up, how is its citations comparing to the other items that were also cited in a paper? Developed particularly by the NIH with help from Digital Science. We have applied this where it's available and are rolling this out further as we go along to all types of content. So we can understand already that there are some strong indicators, not equal across the world. There are different kinds of hotspots of innovation. So as far as I can see it, Canada, China, and the US are the pieces of Huawei, potentially the UK as well, that are obviously doing the kind of research that's gaining particular kinds of traction. Or it could be that they are working with authors whose footprint in the publishing world is closely monitored. And so you could actually have a look at who it is that's working with them. One thing that you can do, because we have fields of research married now and imposed, I suppose, on top of these data, is that you could take the same data and instead of saying, well, okay, we're counting citations and we're looking at Altmetric, that's fine. What about if we do the same kind of counting, but we now divide it down by where they're actually doing their research? So what is Huawei actually focusing on when it comes to areas of technology, rather than simply listing high citations to low citations? And so you can see that, unsurprisingly, AI and image processing, something again that I'm going to keep teasing, we're coming back to. Obviously, communications technologies and information systems are in there, but there are data like, for example, data format. Data format is as far as I know, it's an RCDC code, actually. They are potentially writing articles about the benefits of XML or JSON format, for example, and that probably goes along hand in hand with statistics as well. So there's something about how they are handling their data there as well. So you can divide out any institution, really, any company, any academic, actually any individual researcher by the fields they are working in. And those fields that they're working in are not the same as the ones that you would get from just taking the fields that are given to the journals in which they are publishing. So that is very useful to see the kinds of focus that's out there. You can divide this up into visual ways of looking at it. I'll apologize that these slightly overlap with each other, but once you have these kinds of data, once you have either exported it from the Dimensions platform or you started using our API, you can begin to feed in visual renderings of our data into a local system to see areas of research of not just one company, but multiple companies, and see where they're overlapping. Or you can do the same thing with an author's output as well, since for a researcher or an author, we are now also judging when they are involved in patent production or when they're running a clinical trial. Unusual in the case of Huawei, of course, they have no clinical trials. And in technology in general, especially mobile communications technology, that's unlikely. With medical, of course, it can be very different. But you can get a sense that, information systems, that not only is a dominant area in which Huawei is publishing, you can see actually that the data they are producing that is categorized as information systems is cited quite a bit more in terms of its field performance than other items from it. So you can see they publish actually less than 200, well, something about 200 papers, but they are enormously successful in terms of getting attention. Whereas you can see communications technologies, that was the largest tranche of what they produce. And yet they are, they're doing almost twice as well as the average item. So that's also very, very good. So you can see they're certainly having an impact with the data that they're producing. One can also flip this around, because we add affiliations to everything and say, all right, the data that Huawei is producing has certain different kinds of performance indicators, can be broken down into individual categories, multiple different kinds of categories. We can then see where their focus generally is in terms of their research, but we can also then say, well, who are the institutions that are co-publishing with Huawei of any kind? Who are the top co-publishing institutions? Who are they collaborating with? Who are they working with? Because it's very unusual that somebody like a large corporate would just author items by themselves. It's not completely unheard of. It does happen. They can even be the dominant author. There could be just one of just two authors that are on an item, but they tend to collaborate with areas of excellence. And so if we do this and order it by the number of publications, we can see they are obviously collaborating with a lot of Chinese universities, but they do have Georgia Institute of Technology, they do have Waterloo in Canada, and quite a few others as well. And we can again see the attention that they get broken down by their collaborators. So we can see, for example, that Georgia Institute of Technology, even though they only co-publish 49 items with them, they are immensely well cited in comparison to other items within the same field of research. Or Huazhong University of Science and Technology, HUST, which is approaching almost 5 times the expected number of citations in the area. Interestingly, that same that same institution is only receiving a sort of a median altmetric attention of about 5%, but it's interesting to see how that can vary sometimes. Some of them are going to be perhaps the kinds of bits of research are going to be more marketable, I suppose, to social media. It might be more native to those kinds of platforms in terms of interest generation. So it's probably not a good way of ranking purely on the amount of them that have been mentioned on there, but it is interesting to see how these different centers are performing when they are collaborating with Huawei on particular items. You can also rank them, of course, by publication volume, as we had done before. So we can see, of course, Beijing is top, and Huazhong is at about 30 odd items for number of publications. But it is also quite interesting to have a look at these individual centers of excellence according to their various metrics. So obviously on the left we have the FCR, that just a reminder that the higher that is, the higher the average citations for that particular field of research. And on the altmetric percentage mentioned, the number of them, the percentage of the items which have at least received one news story or tweet, so we can get a sense of how they're doing. You see there are 2 dominant ones there, and it is Georgia and Huazhong actually that have very, very high levels of citation performance. They also have very high levels. 20% is really quite high actually. To have something like 1/5 of your items mentioned at least once is normally what we see from the average university across all disciplines. So it's interesting to see that when one takes just the items that have been co-published with a company, that there is something interesting there. I would probably go out on a limb and say that even though other institutions here are more heavily represented when it comes to the number of publications, I would say probably the key people, the key partners, the ones that are probably getting the work done, tend to be Georgia, Huazhong, perhaps Tsinghua or University of Waterloo in Canada. They tend to be the highest overall, with particular Georgia and Huazhong being the top ones. At this point, you would probably want to go and have a look at what else is being worked on by those institutions. Is artificial intelligence and image processing a big deal at those institutions? What else are they publishing at that institution? Who are the main researchers there? And you could flip it around again and say, who is attaining the most money? Who's winning the large grants in those fields at those institutions? Are these people we would like to work with? Is this the kind of material we need to be reading? Because we need to know perhaps the next step when it comes to mobile communications technologies or data or whatever it is that is being studied there and developed on. Now, you've only seen the, I suppose, top few. I've put the top 10 countries here on the right in terms of how it breaks down. But Huawei's global network of research collaboration is just that. It is global. It is quite remarkable how well spread their researchers are. The way that we've produced this is to look at the affiliation data that's in there, so we can see where researchers are based, we can see where they are affiliated, we of course know from our grid data where that is in the world, and we can then marry this together, so we can see the output, we can see their affiliations, we can now also see their countries, and we can see some of the dominant areas in which they are actually represented. On top of that, we could look away now from the publications. We could say, all right, that was the sort of academic paper side of things. When it comes to those, I think it was, what, 102,000 patents that are in Huawei's name, how do these break down? Because traditionally we've had patent categories, which are immensely hard to read for humans. They are extremely exacting and very, they almost look like code words. They're not useful by themselves unless you know exactly what you're looking at in terms of being a patent research officer. But because we have also broken these down in different ways, including field of research, that is what FOR is, that is what we're looking at on the right, and also by branch, so we can see where the intellectual property of Huawei as a global company, broken down by its constituent elements, its particular offices, is filing these. And it is, of course, not a surprise that almost all of them are registered in China, with USA coming in at number 2 there, constituting almost everything that they have listed. But interestingly, we can see that AI and image processing on the right is actually the 4th category. It's not actually the not dominant category at all. It's something that is lower than I thought it would be. Of course, communications technology is going to be number 1 because that is one of their core businesses, but it is interesting to see how these break down. And so you can start to see, if you sort of use the dimensions data, you can see without having to sort of categorize things yourself, the areas in which a company or an institution or even a researcher themselves is beginning to move across different fields of research as they start to develop their research. And we are going to be going into the system shortly and actually having a look at how one can begin with an area of research. We're going to use a slightly different way of doing this, but we're going to go in and we're going to get a set of publications that interest me based on the general area, the sort of almost semantic or concept area in which they are. And then we're going to start interrogating how we can sort of see how these data have ultimately impacted innovation themselves. To do that, we are going to use a version of the dimension search called the abstract search. So one thing that is quite interesting is that you can, of course, search the dimensions service by keyword, and that will, of course, bring back things that share that keyword to a greater or lesser degree. And relevance is then judged based on the prominence of that keyword, the number of times that keyword shows up, whether it shows up in the title will have a huge boosting effect as opposed to whether it shows up once in the full text and so forth. We can search the full text using dimensions. About 2/3 of the 96 million items are there in full text. The rest have sort of enriched abstracts and so forth. Or we can actually use the abstract search. And the abstract search works quite simply in that it differentiates itself from the keyword search in that we can copy something that we find interesting and paste that entire thing into the abstract search, and it'll then do a concept extraction of what we've looked for. So we are going to find items that are related, but don't necessarily share all or even some of the keywords that are being used. And so, for example, for this one, what I've done is I've taken something that is about facial recognition, probably with use of the idea of using it for mobile phones or for payment technologies, so that you can sort of look at your phone or your device or whatever it is, or even look at something that's in a shop or by the vendor, and it can authenticate you safely, accurately, quickly, so that you can then perform whatever sensitive item it is, whether it's paying for something or just accessing your data. And what I've done is I've copied that. You can see this is actually one of the items from Huawei Technologies, working in the Chinese university in Hong Kong. So this is something that they have worked on, along with Shenzhen and a few others. And so I'm going to go to the Dimensions front page. I'm going to begin where all of our data exists, and instead of searching the full or the title and abstract, I am going to ask Dimensions to give me back its best guess about this when it comes to similar items. And it'll take a while, it takes a few seconds, because what it's doing is it is going to, it was actually quicker than I thought it would be, it'll go to the grants, the publications, the patents, and perform that concept extraction search. And so now we are left with almost a grouping of like over 1,000 patents, over 1,000 publications. There's about 100 grants in there. A couple of clinical trials also match this, that are conceptually similar to this. And what I've done is I downloaded these items. We actually then took these items and have mapped out when they were published. So we're still looking at patents here. So we are looking at patents now based on the concepts, based on that particular publication. So when it comes to things like facial recognition, we're no longer having to type facial recognition or facial authentication or something else and try to fit as many keywords in as possible. I've been able to take something from a particular company or from a particular corporation or from a particular researcher or just a piece of research itself, and I've taken the abstracted information from it, have asked Dimensions to give me a profile of items, whether it's patents or whatever, that match the general conceptual area, the field of this. And I can then see, well, what are the innovations that are happening? it is interesting to see that both the publication output and the patent output, so we're looking at journals, articles, and other similar publications on the left, and patents on the right. The publications on the left are much more smooth in their increase, but the accession can be seen on the right as well. There is a general growth over time in the interest of accurate, non-spoofable facial technologies that can be quick and accurate and so forth. So this is obviously something that has been growing since 2010, clearly on this list. If you are able to detect that increased trend over time, you can get ahead of the innovations that are being produced around the world. You can see the same thing for CRISPR in our situation, in our data. You can see the moment in 2011 when it starts to gain publication traction, and then it explodes around 2014 as people start to talk about it, and as grants get funded, as the developments are made within the technology and so forth. So it seems like we are now reaching that also with facial recognition technologies, and particularly different kinds of ways of doing that. So there are these general trends that can be seen for anything. And we could then also turn it the other way around and say, all right, let's begin with a profile of data from Dimensions based on the abstract search we just did. So I have got here, for example, still my 1,000 publications-ish, I think it's probably a few more, that are matching this particular age invariant face recognition. I am going to export that as a list of publications. And what I'm going to do is take the identifiers of those publications out of that list, and I will then copy it over into the Altmetric database, because I'm now interested in seeing what social attention is this receiving. Is it being used by the academic community in non-academic settings, like, for example, Wikipedia? Is it making waves on Faculty of 1,000? Does it find its way into medical recommendation literature? Has it made the news? What does the social web think of it? And particularly for us, for these publications, I want to know, have these publications been used in patents? So the other way around. We're no longer looking at where patents themselves are a form of output. We're now thinking about, I want to see patents as a form of attention to a particular tranche of items that I have gleaned by looking at the concepts. And so to do that, I'm going to jump over to the export center. I think by now, yep, it's already done. It's actually 3,500 records that have ultimately matched that concept. If I just open these up, I will, if I'm ever to be free of my pop-ups, I will be able to open these. And let me just make sure that that was right, actually. Yeah, there it is. So I will open them up, and I see now that I've got my items that belong to this general concept of artificial intelligence facial recognition thing that we've got. I'm going to just simply filter the DOI field so that I can put them in the order so I can highlight them all. And there we go, we've got 3,400. I've got a couple of PubMed IDs I'm going to pop in as well, So we'll start with the 3,500 items. And I'm now moving across because I want to know what sort of attention and reuse these items have received outside of academia, outside of things like that. And so to do that, I'm now in the Altmetric database, which is automatically tracking items that have scholarly identifiers and seeing where they pop up, either as links or described within policy and so forth. I'm looking in the full Altmetric database. So if you're a customer of ours, you're used to seeing a version of this that's been filtered to your institution first. I have moved out of that to the parallel database that we ship to customers as well, which means that I can now look at really anything out there. And I can simply copy these items in. And I've remembered that for some reason I have a problem with my items when it comes to my version of Chrome on here, which is rather annoying. I'll see if I can't just simply refresh it. Let's see. I'll have one more go, and if not, I will have to use a different set of items. I can do that. Let's give it one more time. I'm wondering whether I have got a plugin that is causing problems here. Let's just disable ad block. I'm sure Altmetric will be leaving me alone on that one. Let's try that. It's a problem that I do not have on my laptop. Let's have a look and see if it's going to behave. Nope, it's not going to. Easily then I will simply use a pre-filtered pre-filtered list that I already saved somewhere else. Once you've saved them, they pop over here as saved searches, so that we are able to, hang on, let me just go back to the full database there. I am able to pop over to my saved searches, and it would look exactly like this, actually. So, for example, I'll take these items here. I can actually jump to the search and show you how it's been built. So what I've done is dump in slightly more DOIs. Actually, it might be that we find something more interesting here. It'll be thematically unrelated, I'm afraid. But basically what has happened is that I have added the items in the way that you saw them in that list. And I've then simply saved it so that I can then do a search based on them. And this is now querying the Altmetric database for all the attention that there actually is to these items. So I can see up here is the attention to it. And I can now see, absent some of the more sort of scholarly items like abstracts and so forth, we're now simply seeing the attention that the social web has given to any set of items that I've looked at, whether it be for facial recognition, whether it could be for a general institution's research. Most likely, if you're coming in the way that I've done and you have chosen a data set from Dimensions that is conceptually relevant to something, they will look not quite as generous, as general as these do. But once I'm here, because Altmetric tracks where patents have referred to research, almost as a form of interest, as a form of attention, just like we do with news, or whether we do with anything else, like blogs or social media, I'm able to see now what sort of attention has happened in the sort of technological world. So in addition to things like the various news sites that have shown up with these kinds of items where we link to the items that are discussing this in multiple different languages, I can now also say, all right, well, these 11,000 items that have actually been mentioned of the 22,000 items I asked about, what, if any, interest exists within the patent literature? Is there some attention there? What is the most interesting item in terms of how often it's been reused by patents? So we're looking at now almost a tail end of online attention that results in people creating inventions based on this. And if you do that for a particular corporate profile of publications, or whether you take the publications of an individual author and find out how they are influencing technical transfer in areas they're probably unfamiliar with. It could be, and it most likely is the case, that individual researchers and even companies have actually no idea how their publications might have ended up in the patent literature of a different company or an organization or a user or an inventor who has decided that they have now read something of use within the literature. That literature belonged either to you, or it belongs to a competing organization, or it belongs to an innovative partner out there, so that you can see immediately this item here actually from this list is the one that not only has informed policy, so it's informed things like the National Academies Press has used it 4 times in different policy papers, but we can see also it's been tremendously well used by patents. So we can see, it's not a surprise, I think this was actually a search for CRISPR, so I should have done that to handle the limitations of my desktop. I must look into that actually. So we can see here, from most recent to oldest, the various different novel claims, the inventions that have been patented, and when they were patented, where they were patented as well, so that we can get a sense of any set of publications, either collected by looking at just a research organization or by doing that concept extraction we did. What is really making the waves? Where is the innovation really happening? Is this potentially a new area in which innovation is going to be happening and where we need to get in the game, so to speak? And just as with anything else at Digital Science, we tend to only ever link to items. We don't give you just, hey, this has been in 50 patents, well done. We tend to send you right back to Dimensions, for example. So from Altmetric, where we can see now, we can drill down to the items appearing most in the technical transfer world. We then jump back to that patent now in the Dimensions interface. And we can see now who the assignees are, whether they are the current or the original ones. We can see the references that are made in this patent. We can see the money now. We can start to tie in some of the funding that has supported this particular innovation. And so we can sort of understand some of that as well. You can see here also these amazing patent categories that exist, as well as, of course, a link where available to the full text of the patent itself. So you can begin to start seeing how this particular piece of research has been referred to within patent literature. Something that it used to take experts to do, because it was all about being able to search within the literature reliably. And this is why we had patent databases, and to this day have very sophisticated, very exacting patent databases that behave very, very differently to search systems like Google. These are about precision, about looking for within 3 words of this or that. We are instead tying together where the research appears in that way. And there it is, it's actually loaded. So you can actually see yourself what is actually being invented here. If we pedal through here enough, you will find eventually the references that show up here. So we will have been mining through all of these and adding them to all the different details pages that there are out there. One final thing I'm going to show is how this behaves with grant data as well. And then I think I'll be close to finishing, actually, since I've yacked for almost 45 minutes now. I will also send, if you want, the data set that we got out of the original search that I was unable to load in just now, in case anybody's interested as well. So here, for example, we now have the ability to see how funding behaves. And so we can search for pretty much anything that comes in this area. In fact, we can do that same abstract search that we did before and see the kinds of queries that are, sorry, the kind of money that's being funded. What sort of attention is out there for this? Let me just jump through to the facial recognition item again. There we go. So we're back at that publication that was about face algorithms. Algorithms for learning algorithms that jointly estimate the latent factors of the model parameters. I know what I'm talking about. And if I then start quite simply by going to our grants section, I can do exactly the same abstract search. I can say I would like a concept search of this, and I want to see in the, again, conceptual area, what kind of funding is there? What sort of attention is there in terms of grant makers? Who is funding the most? Who is getting the most research, and so forth? So we can see the individual items. It goes back, like we saw on our graphs very often, 2012, 2015, for example. We can see some of we can see the abstract of the item. This one's unbelievably detailed, so it has a lot of information there as well. We can see similar grants. That's the same kind of similarity and concept extraction that's going on there to tell you this grant, which came up from our concept search, has also got related grants that are made maybe by the same organization, certainly in the same general field, without having to build in those complicated searches. And I can see when they ran from and to. These are actually all in the future. So they all began this year. So this is obviously an extreme hotbed. If we were to rerun this same data set next year or in a few years, you'll notice that an immense amount of money will have also produced probably a lot of researchers as well. But if we go back again, we can, of course, go and see those individual items as well as the resulting publications, if there were some. But we can also start to dig into some of the behavior around the funders. So, for example, if we look at the National Institute on Aging, which has the largest amount of individual funding, but actually only 3 research grants, we can break out and see the comparison of what they are totally budgeting for, so what their total spend is on any given year versus what it is that we're looking at here. So when it comes to the concept of this age invariant face recognition, this is actually extremely low compared to the amount that they are really putting out every year in the billions. And we can compare the charts for other items as well. So these are actually all very low. It's still very, very marginal, which tells your researchers, I suppose, something as well, that this is still extremely low. There are a couple back here, and then there was a drop completely when it came to the Japan Society for the Promotion of Sciences, for example. So this is still fairly low on funding attention, I would say. But this is something that you can dig into, something you can export and data mine yourself. As I said at the beginning, I'm no data scientist, but if I can begin to do it, then it is fascinating to see what some of our customers can do about this as well, and can interact with our data to get an unusually granular view of the different kinds of publication behavior, the different kinds of funding behavior, the collaboration networks that are out there, being able to hone in on very particular concepts without perhaps knowing huge Boolean strings or even what phrases to make sure they're including. This is something that our system does actually out of the box as a part of the ability of combining these data to begin with, that same kind of machine learning and concept extraction that powers our service. All right, with that, I'm going to take a break from talking. We may actually already be finished. It could well be also, I'll warn in advance, that if there are any data wonks and data experts on and you ask a question I'm not able to answer, I will of course admit that straight away and make up a response. No, of course not. I will take a note of anything that people have in terms of questions, and we'll obviously ask our team. Hopefully there'll be something that can be answered on the call. If you do have any questions, there is either the questions or the chat. Feel free to use any of those. Meanwhile, I'm going to reset my view of the Explorer again, and also thank you in advance for your time. One thing I'll put on the screen is my contact details. And I do recommend, by the way, that you do follow our Twitter accounts. We're horrendously active on social media. I guess it's part of the job. Since online media is our business, you can follow the efforts of Altmetric, tracking their social attention, the different ways in which they're discovering attention within policy and patents, which is actually one of the most recently launched items that we've done. Or you can follow Dimensions itself, at DS Dimensions. There is always a flurry of innovations happening almost every single week. I was joking with the university this morning that I knew I was in the right place because I can't even keep up with the innovations alone that are happening at these two companies, let alone the 14 companies that digital science employs, meaning that I have to make sure every time that my slides that describe the products are up to date and are accurate, and that I have to increase all the numbers of items and features that are on there. It's a good problem to have. As opposed to something that is the same year after year. And you can follow actually digital science itself, so the portfolio company at DigiSci, digital science. And if you want to email myself, I'm available at ben@altmetric.com. I will quickly check for some questions. No, there are no questions today. This means I was hopefully very clear with what I showed. If not, please do. Oh, yeah, we do have one actually. I'm assuming one would have to subscribe to Dimensions to access all of this. Is there any part of it that's freely available, such as the Altmetric scores linked to articles? What a great question. I didn't cover that, did I? So yes, we have significant free offerings in both Altmetric and Dimensions. It was actually one of our goals when we developed the system. It's something that I normally talk about in other webinars. Today, we were jumping straight into the data itself. One of the goals was at the beginning that we decided that the A&I citation database universe was boring, too expensive, not innovative enough, and siloed. And so we wanted to combine lots of different types of data together. We wanted to make it have a full API for all data types, for almost all of the functions, and that was not simply twice the price of the database. But one of the key things was that it is simply frustrating that we are still in the era of open science and open access and open data and open everything, that we are not still in open citations. We end up here at this login page or here over at our friend Scopus. And that this seemed like it, Microsoft Academic was going to be a good example of this, but I can't get it to load. And it's not just my desktop computer. Every computer I've used is somehow not loading it for me. I don't know what it is. Maybe they haven't signed their GDPR agreements. And then there's Google Scholar, of course, which is a noble open effort, but which has 16 results for this item, which we know has been cited more. And so not only did we open up our citations completely for our service, the University of Zurich, which is where we started this search, are not a subscriber to Altmetric or Dimensions. And so they are able immediately to see the kinds of field and relative citations, the recency of citations. They're also able to jump into the Dimensions database. And what we offer for free in Dimensions is all of those references that I wanted to see, all of those citations. We even include the grants as well. You can even jump to the grants as well. And this is all in a version that's entirely free. I'm now not logged in. I don't have IP access at home. The 96 million publications and their attendant information, including the individual links to the grants, the individual links to the publications, anything else that's on here is something you can go through a lot. The limitation is, because of course we do have a difference between the licensed versions and the non-licensed versions, is that we don't include the grants, the patents, and clinical trials as searchable areas of the interface themselves. They appear as they are linked to the publications, but that's where we wanted to start. Since the existing, I suppose, I don't like saying the word status quo, but since the existing state is that publications and citations form the core of basically every citation database, we figured, well, why not have a really good, fast, responsive, free one of that? And on top of that, if the item is open access, that people can get one-click access to the items themselves. But when it comes to exporting large amounts of data, accessing the API, accessing more than one type of field of research, being able to access the institutions themselves, so being able to search for an organization, that's part of the subscribed versions. But I hope you would agree, it's pretty impressive to have close to 100 million publications in one place. To have full text searchability of it is built right into the platform. That abstract search you can do as well. So you can do that concept extraction right now. It's just you can only export 100 items at a time. But not bad, I would say, for a start anyway. I hope that sort of helps with some of it. We have a couple of other questions. Is it possible to receive a recorded video of this webinar? Yes, absolutely. We have recorded this. I remembered this time. And if you were on my webinar last time, I even remembered to share my screen earlier than 5 minutes into the presentation. So yes, you will get the slides. You will get the webinar recording. As always, I'm entirely open for any other questions you might have at ben@altmetric.com. Feel free to tweet to us, follow us, and all the rest of it. Yeah, we'll give you all of that. We will share the links probably tomorrow, I would say. If there are no other questions, I think we are almost at time. This is the point at which the webinar software shuts me off in mid-sentence for being over the hour. So I think to play things safe, there seem to be no other questions. Thank you very much for attending. Feel free to get in touch with us anytime. You'll probably see us on the road at various conferences. If you're from an academic institution, most likely you'll see us on campus at some point. And we encourage you to go to app.dimensions.ai. Let me just go and show you where it is. Here it is, app.dimensions.ai. You could even go to dimensions.ai, not dimensions.com. I believe that's a festival, although you can go there if you like. It's just not relevant to today's discussion, but there is the free app linked right at the top there. You don't even need to register or log in. You're quite able to use the publications portion without a login. If you want to export something, that's when we will ask you for a login, but you'll be able to see our Altmetric data, our citations data, to be able to search it, to order it by our various metrics, to even do some basic analysis, just like I showed before, fields of research, the overview of whatever it is you're looking at. We do have the researcher tab in there, so you can search for individual researchers and the work that they've done. We do include things like their ORCID, their Scopus author ID, and so forth, so we can help with disambiguation. So that is all there for you to play with, and I hope you spend the weekend playing with it as well. And come back to us with feedback. Tell us what you think of the service. And if you want to try out some of the more advanced features of the subscribed version, drop me a line as well. And with that, I will thank everyone for their time, and we will be in touch with our recordings shortly. Have a wonderful rest of the day.